Good morning, Kat here. I'm a little shy about turning the camera on myself, and I figured you'd want to see the book anyway, so I'm just going to follow along with the book. This book has really blessed my heart, and I think that's kind of the point. I think the premise is that our hearts take so much damage and hear so much from the enemy that eventually we insulate our hearts against even just the movement of God. And this book is meant to show us how there's a God-shaped hole in our hearts, and we really can only fill that hole with God. That we have a tendency to look for the things that to fill our heart with that's not God, and nothing fills it quite right. Yeah. Anyway, the book says it better than me, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started. This is the book, The Sacred Romance, Drawing Closer to the Heart of God, and I'm just going to read it because I like to read aloud, and hopefully there's more than one of you out there, even if it is just one of you who wants to be read to. All right, so here we go. Some years into our spiritual journey, this is called The Love Life of the Heart, or The Lost Life of the Heart. By the way, my dog is squeaking a toy, so hopefully it will stop. All right. Some years into our spiritual journey, after the waves of anticipation that mark the beginning of any pilgrimage have begun to ebb into the life's middle years of service and business, a voice speaks to us in the midst of all we are doing. There's something missing in all of this, it suggests. There's something more. The voice often comes in the middle of the night or the early hours of morning when our hearts are most united and vulnerable. The most unedited and vulnerable. At first, we mistake the source of this voice and assume it's just our imagination. We fluff up our pillow, roll over, and go back to sleep. Days, weeks, even months go by, and the voice speaks to us again. Aren't you thirsty? Listen to your heart. There's something missing. We listen, and we're aware of a sigh, and under the sigh is something dangerous, something that feels adulterous and disloyal to the religion that we're serving. We sense a passion deep within that threatens a total disregard for the program we're living. It feels reckless, wild. Unsettled, we turn and walk quickly away, like a woman who feels more than she wants when her eyes meet those of a man, not her husband. We tell ourselves that the small, passionate voice is an intruder who has gained entry because we have not been diligent enough in practicing our religion. Our pastor seems to agree with this assessment and exhorts us from the pulpit to be more faithful. We try to silence the voice with outward activity, redoubling our efforts at Christian service. We join a small group and read a book on establishing more effective prayer life. We train to be a part of a church evangelism team. We tell ourselves that in the malaise of spirit we feel even as we step up our religious activity is a sign of spiritual immaturity, and we scold our heart for its lack of fervor. Sometime later, the voice in our heart dares to speak to us again, more insistently this time. Listen to me. There's something missing in all this. You long to be in a love affair, an adventure. You were made for something more. You know it. When the young prophet Samuel heard the voice of God calling to him in the night, he had the counsel from his priestly mentor, Eli, to tell him how to respond. Even so, it took them 3 times to realize that it was God calling. Rather than ignoring the voice or rebuking it, Samuel finally listened. In our modern, pragmatic world, we often have no such mentor, so we do not understand that it is God speaking to us in our heart. Having so long been out of touch with our deepest longing, we fail to recognize the voice and the one who is calling to us through it. Frustrated by our heart's continuing sabotage of a dutiful Christian life, some of us silence the voice by locking our heart away in the attic, feeding it only the bread and water of duty and obligation until it is almost dead, the voice now small and weak. But sometimes in the night, When our defenses are down, we can still hear it call to us, oh, so faintly, a distant whisper. Come morning, the day's new activities scream for our attention, and the sound of the cry is gone, and we congratulate ourselves on finally overcoming the flesh. Others of us agree to give our heart a life on the side, if it will only let us alone and not rock the boat. We try to lose ourselves in our work, or get a hobby, either of which would soon begin to feel like an addiction. We have an affair, or develop a colorful fantasy life fed by dime store romances or pornography. We learn to enjoy the juicy intrigues and secretive gossip. We make sure to maintain enough distance between ourselves and others, and even between ourselves and our own heart, to keep hidden the practical agnosticism we are living now that our inner life has been divorced from our outer life. Having thus appeased our heart, we nonetheless are forced to give up our spiritual journey because our heart will no longer come with us. It is bound up in the little indulgences we feed it to keep it at bay. Losing heart. The life of the heart is a place of great mystery, yet we have many expressions to help us express this flame of the human soul. We describe a person without compassion as heartless, and we urge him or her to have a heart. Our deepest hurts we call heartaches. Jilted lovers are broken-hearted. Courageous soldiers are brave-hearted. The truly evil are black-hearted, and saints have hearts of gold. If we need to speak at the most intimate level, we ask for a heart-to-heart talk. Light-hearted is how we feel on vacation. And when we love someone as truly as we may, we love with all our heart. But when we lose our passion for life, when a deadness sets in which we cannot seem to shake, we confess, my heart's just not in it. In the end, it doesn't matter how well we've performed on or what we've accomplished. A life without heart is not worth living. For out of this wellspring of our soul flows all true caring and all meaningful work, all real worship and all sacrifice. Our faith, hope, and love issue from this fount as well, because it is in our heart that we first hear the voice of God, and it is in His heart that we come to know Him and learn to live in His love. So you can see that to lose heart is to lose everything, and a loss of heart best describes most men and women in our day. It isn't just the addictions and affairs and depression and heartaches, though. God knows there's enough of these to cause even the best of us to lose heart. But there is the busyness, the driveness, the fact that most of us are living merely to survive. Beneath it, we feel restless, weary, and vulnerable. Indeed, the many forces driving modern life have not only assaulted the life of our heart, they have also dismantled the heart's habitat, that geography of mystery and transcendence we knew so well as children. I, Brent, remember sitting in my college zoology class as my professor expounded with upraised arms, the perspiration-stained underarms of his shirt proudly exposed, that man's basic problem was that he wanted to smell, be like a flower instead of a mammal. In physics class, the professor seemed to take satisfaction in explaining to us that the beauty of sunsets and rainbows was due only to the refraction of light through water and dust particles in the air. It was as if the miracle of light itself were somehow done away with by these explanations. I remember leaving those professors of the age of reason with a sense of loss, a sense of, oh, so that's all it is. The message of my teachers was clear. Once we dispense with unhelpful mysticism and superstition, the progress of mankind will proceed unhindered. All of us have had that experience at one time or another, whether it be as we walked away from our teachers, our parents, a church service, or sexual intimacy. The sense that something important, perhaps the only thing important, had been explained away or tarnished and lost to us forever. Sometimes, little by little, sometimes in large chunks, life has appropriated the terrain meant to sustain and nourish the more wild life of the heart, forcing it to retreat as an endangered species into smaller, more secluded, and often darker geographies for its survival. As this has happened, something has been lost, something vital. For what shall we do when we wake one day to find we've lost touch with our heart, and with it the very refuge where God's presence resides? Starting very early, life has taught all of us to ignore and distrust the deepest yearnings of our heart. Life, for the most part, teaches us to suppress our longing and live only in the external world where efficiency and performance are everything. We've learned from parents and peers at school, at work, and even from our own spiritual mentors that something else is wanted from us other than our heart, which is to say, that which is most deeply us. Very seldom are we ever invited to live out of our heart. If we are wanted, we are often wanted for what we can offer functionally. If rich, we are honored for our wealth. If beautiful, for our looks. If intelligent, for our brains. So we learn to offer only those parts of us that are approved, living out of a carefully crafted performance to gain acceptance from those who represent life to us. We divorce ourselves from our heart and begin to live a double life. Frederick Buechner expresses this phenomenon in his biographical world, Telling Secrets. Our original shimmering self gets buried so deep we hardly live out of it at all. Rather, we learn to live out of all the other selves which we are constantly putting on and taking off like coats and hats against the world's weather. On the outside, there is the external story of our lives. This is the life everyone sees, our life of work and play and church, of family and friends, paying bills and growing older. Our external story is where we carve out the identity most others know. It is the place where we have learned to label each other in a way that implies we've reached our final destination. Bob is an accountant. Mary works for the government. Ted is an attorney. The Smiths are the family with the well-kept lawn and lovely children. The Joneses are that family whose children are always in trouble. Here, busyness substitutes for meaning, efficiency substitutes for creativity, and functional relationships substitute for love. In the outer life, we live from ought, I ought to do this, rather from desire, I want to do this, and management substitutes for mystery. There are 3 steps to a happy marriage, 5 ways to improve your portfolio, 7 habits for success. There is a spiritual dimension to this external world and our desire to do good works, but communion with God is replaced by activity for God. There's little time in this outer world for deep questions. Given the right plan, everything in life can be managed, except your heart. The inner life, the story of our heart, is the desire of the deep places within us, our passions and dreams, our fears and our deepest wounds. It is the unseen life, the mystery within, what Buechner calls our shimmering self. It cannot be managed like a corporation. The heart does not respond to principles and programs. It seeks not efficiency, but passion, art, poetry, beauty, mystery, ecstasy. These are what rouse the heart. Indeed, they are the language that must be spoken if one wishes to communicate with the heart. It's why Jesus so often taught and related to people by telling stories and asking questions. His desire to engage their intellects, his desire was not just to engage their intellects, but to capture their hearts. Indeed, if we will listen, a sacred romance calls to us through our heart every moment of our lives. It whispers to us on the wind, invites us through the laughter of good friends, reaches out to us through the touch of someone we love. We've heard it in our favorite music, sensed it at the birth of our first child, been drawn to it while watching the shimmer of sunset on the ocean. The romance is even present in times of great personal suffering, the illness of a child, the loss of a marriage, the death of a friend. Something calls to us through experiences like those and rouses an inconsolable longing deep within our heart, wakening in us a yearning for intimacy, beauty, and adventure. This longing is the most powerful part of any human personality. It fuels our search for meaning. It's for wholeness, for a sense of being truly alive. However we may describe this deep desire, it is the most important thing about us, our heart of hearts, the passion of our life. And the voice that calls to us in this place is none other than the voice of God. We cannot hear this voice if we've lost touch with our hearts. The true story of every person in this world is not the story you see, the external story. The true story of each person is the journey of his or her heart. Jesus himself knew that if people lived only in the outer story, eventually they would lose track of their inner life, the life of their heart he so much desired to redeem. Indeed, it was the most religious people of his time that Jesus spoke his strongest warnings about the loss of heart. It is tragic for any person to lose touch with the life of their heart, but especially so for those of us who once heard the call in our heart and recognized it as the voice of Jesus of Nazareth. We may remember him inviting us to a life of beauty, intimacy, and adventure that we thought was lost. For others of us, when he called, it felt for the first time in our lives as if our heart had finally found a home. We responded in faith, in hope, and in love, and began a journey we call the Christian life. Each day seemed a new adventure as we rediscovered the world with God by our side. But for many of us, the waves of first love ebbed away in this whirlwind of Christian service and activity, and we begin to lose the romance. Our faith began to feel more like a series of problems that needed to be solved, or principles that had to be mastered, before we could finally enter into the abundant life promised by Christ. We moved our spiritual life into the outer world of activity, and internally we drifted. We sensed that something was wrong and perhaps tried to fix it by tinkering with our outer life. We tried the latest spiritual fad or new church, or simply redoubled our commitment to make faith work. Still, we found ourselves weary, jaded, or simply bored. Others of us immersed ourselves in busyness without really asking where all the activity was headed. At one point in my own spiritual pilgrimage, I stopped to ask myself this question: what is it that I'm supposed to be doing to live the spiritual life in any way that is both truthful and passionately alive? What we want to say in these pages is simply this: our hearts are telling us the truth. There really is something missing. The centrality of the heart. For above all else, the Christian life is a love affair of the heart. It cannot be lived primarily as a set of principles or ethics. It cannot be managed with steps and programs. It cannot be lived exclusively as a moral code leading to righteousness. In response to a religious expert who asked him what he must do to obtain real life, Jesus asked a question in return. "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." The truth of the gospel is intended to free us to love God and others with our whole heart. When we ignore this heart aspect of our faith and try to live out our religion solely as a correct doctrine or ethics, our passion is crippled or perverted, and divorce of our soul from our heart, purposes of God toward us, is deepened. The religious technocrats of Jesus' day confronted him with what they believed were the standards of a life pleasing to God. The external life, they argued, the life of ought and duty and service, was what mattered. "You're dead wrong," Jesus said. "In fact, you're just plain dead, whitewashed tombs. What God cares about is the inner life, the life of the heart." Throughout the Old and New Testaments, the life of the heart is clearly God's central concern. When the people of Israel fell into a totally external life of ritual and observance, God lamented, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." Our heart is the key to Christian life. The Apostle Paul informs us that hardness of heart is behind all of the addictions and evils of the human race. Oswald Chambers writes, "It is by the heart that God is perceived, known, and not by reason, so that it is what faith is, God perceived by the heart." This is why God tells us in Proverbs 4:23, "Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life." He knows that to lose heart is to lose everything. Sadly, most of us watch the oil level in our car more carefully than we watch the life of our heart. One of the greatest invitations ever offered to man, Christ stood up amid the crowds in Jerusalem and said, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures has said, streams of living water will flow from within him." If we aren't aware of our soul's deep thirst, his offer means nothing. But if we will recall, it was from the longing of our hearts that most of us first responded to Jesus. Somehow, years later, we assume he no longer calls to us through the thirst of our heart. Like Galatians, whom Paul rebuked for forgetting how they came to Christ, we find that something or someone has seduced us to return to our outer life and to performance as the way of salvation. This external religious self we try to maintain doesn't recognize God's voice communing with us when he comes to call us more deeply to the romance he has set within us. It is possible to recover the lost life of our heart, and with it the intimacy, beauty, and adventure of life with God. To do so, we must leave what is familiar and comfortable, perhaps even parts of the religion in which we have come to trust, and take a journey. This journey first takes us on a search for the lost life of our heart, and for the voice that once called to us in those secret places, those places and times when our heart was still with us. The pilgrimage of the heart leads us to remember together what it was that first engaged us in deep ways as children. "Anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it," said Jesus. Our journey will take us to explore the hidden questions of the heart, born out of the stories of our lives. It is only by leaving home and taking a pilgrimage that we will begin to see how our own stories are interwoven with the great romance God has been telling since before the dawn of time. It is on this pilgrimage that we will begin to see that each one of us has a part in this cosmic love affair that was created specifically with us in mind. Last, this pilgrimage brings us to the destination set within all of our hearts, in which in some way we have known, longed for, and been haunted by since we were children. This book is born out of a journey that John and I have shared for several years. I have been a Christian counselor for the same length of time that John has been conducting seminars for a major Christian ministry. Both of us have at one time worked in a local church. Our lives have given us a unique look into the lives of modern Christianity, and what we have known from our own stories has been confirmed again and again through hundreds of encounters with other believers. Most Christians have lost the life of their heart, and with it their romance with God. As we trace the steps of the journey toward God's resurrection of the heart, we hope that you discover your soul's deepest longing and invite you to embrace it as the most important part of your life. It is our aim to help you guard your heart, to see more clearly the enemies of your heart and the hearts of those that you love, to enable you to enter the battle for hearts to which our captain calls us. Our journey begins by asking questions, putting words to the movements of the heart. What is this restlessness and emptiness I feel sometimes long years into my Christian journey? What does the spiritual life have to do with the rest of my life? What is it that is set so deeply in my heart, experienced as a longing for adventure and romance, that simply will not leave me alone? Does it have anything to do with God? What is it that He wants from me? Has He been speaking to me through my heart all along? When did I stop listening? When did his voice first call to me? And as I put down here at the bottom, thinking about the reasons why my heart might have distanced itself from God. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I'll be doing chapter 2, probably not today, but I don't know. Let me know what you thought. All right. Bye.